Poštovane gošće I gosti,
Dear guests, welcome on behalf of the NDI. I thank you for spending the rainy Saturday morning to talk with us about a very important topic, the environmental policies for the 21st century, challenges, perspectives, and solutions. Today's conference is funded by USAID agency, and we organized it to spark a dialogue and activate cooperation between different stakeholders, including the decision makers, the NGO sector, citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, so that together we can work on the solutions for the backlogged ecological problems that we face. We have on Zoom the resident country director, Nenad Simovic of NDI, and he will give us an introduction to the topic today. Nenad, please take the floor.
za slučaj da Nenad se ne
Well, in case Nenad is not there, well, this is not definitely the first time that we've had technical difficulties with Zoom. Okay, so while we're waiting for the country director of NDI to join us, I'd like to ask you to please wear face masks. And for those of you who are with us on Zoom platform, of course, you don't have to wear a mask, but what you can do is select the language that you would like to listen to, because we do have simultaneous interpretation. So please select the little globe and you can select the languages English and BCS. Well, in the meantime, Nenad has joined us. Welcome, Nenad. Thank you, Amina. I've been here since 10 o'clock, but of course the difficulties happened right now. Thank you. Also, I'd like to extend my greetings to all the guests that we have in the room, and I'd like to say that it is a great pleasure to address you here. I'm a country director of NDI in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and this topic of the environmental policy for the 21st century challenges, perspectives and solution is very important. Also on behalf of the NDI, I'd like to thank the USAID at the very start that is supporting this project and program, and without whose support it would be impossible. This conference is the finalization of the program that NDI has been implementing over the last 2 or 3 years in Sarajevo Canton, Zenica-Doboj Canton, and Tuzla Canton, so 3 cantons in all. And we worked with the MPs in the 3 cantons in the attempt to strengthen the role of the cantonal assemblies in the field of environment, and also to provide an incentive to multi-party cooperation in the resolution of the problem that is common to the 3 cantons, and that is air pollution. This program involved directly or indirectly around 60 MPs from the assemblies of the 3 cantons, and we hope that we have at least partially managed to raise awareness about the importance of the problem and to provide an incentive to the legislators to launch initiatives to start resolving the problem of air pollution. Today's conference will be of a broader scope than our program, so we hope that these topics will be interesting to you and that interest will later lead to specific initiatives. I also hope that this event will be dynamic and proactive. We have great panelists joining us today. And I'd like really to thank you all for coming, and I will I'll be closely following the discussions today. Thank you very much. Thank you for the encouraging words and the support that has been provided to this initiative within the program of support to political pluralism and good governance in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2019. An informal group of MPs has been established entitled EKOTAF, or EKO Task Force, within the program that was implemented by the NDI and supported by the USAID. Ecotev is a multi-party and inter-cantonal group of MPs involving Sarajevo Canton, Tuzla Canton, and Zenica-Doboj Canton, and it comprises 12 members from 7 different political parties. By establishing such a group, which is a multi-party group, intercantonal group, that in fact provides a broader format for dialogue, the idea was to overcome political divisions and focus on the ability of a common interest of political parties to establish mechanisms of coordination that really affect the actual problems that the citizens face. In this case, it is pollution that affects us all. So by establishing such close cooperation between MPs from different cantonal assemblies, the idea was and the intention was to increase the visibility of cantonal assemblies in the decision-making processes, as well as the capacities of intercantonal cooperation when it comes to policy development in environment protection. As we know, pollution is not something that acknowledges cantonal boundaries. In 2020, in the beginning of 2020, with the technical assistance of the National Democratic Institute, members of this group conducted a research or a survey to check to what extent is the topic of environment protection recognized as priority topic in party policies in the 3 most polluted cantons in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this mini survey involved 63 MPs, 20 from Sarajevo Canton Assembly, 25 from Tuzla Assembly, and 18 from Zenica-Doboj Assembly. And the survey showed that there is partial recognition or awareness, but only partial awareness of the problem of pollution. And this resulted in an idea to draft a manual, a guidebook, to inform the present and future MPs about the matters that are relevant for environment protection and the possible approaches to their resolution. So after this successful survey, the experts have provided support to the drafting of this manual for the MPs in cantonal assemblies, and this manual was presented in Sarajevo Assembly, Tuzla, and Zenica-Doboj assemblies. At today's conference, we will particularly focus on 2 topics. The first is the Green Agenda for Bosnia and Herzegovina, presence and the vision for future, and that's the name of our first panel. And we have the following participants of the panel. Well, it seems that you've spontaneously taken the seats that are listed in that order in the agenda. Mr. Zvezdan Karađan, Minister of Spatial Planning and Environment in the government of Tuzla Canton, Muhamed Mujakic, the Law Institute of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Faruk Hadžić, economic expert, Armin Basic, expert associate in the Ministry of Spatial Planning, Transport and Communication, Zenica-Doboj Canton, Adnan Medic, Assistant Minister for Environment in the Ministry of Spatial Planning, Civil Engineering and Environment in Canton Sarajevo. And at the center here we have Mrs. Suada Numic, Federation Ministry of Environment and Tourism. I have introduced you, so I suggest we start with the questions right away. We prepared the questions for this panel, and hopefully answers to these questions will somehow take us through all the important topics. But of course, you can always join in answering other questions, or if you think another person can provide a better answer, please give us a sign, and we will start right away. Planning of environment protection. Does the cantonal Environment Action Plan. Is it being implemented, and who monitors this implementation? Let's start from Tuzla. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. It is a pleasure and honor to be at such a conference. I think such events should take place more often, especially in the given circumstances, because everything that is going on will affect, in both positive and negative terms, both the businesses and the life in our canton. The cantonal plan for waste management and environment protection was adopted in my previous 11-month mandate. It was a transitional expert government that has been formed after the unrests that took place. And what was good is that we've covered all the segments that are important for our canton. The plan was being implemented, and it is still implemented. However, due to the coronavirus situation and the lack of funding, we've delayed the development of the new plan for next year, and definitely in next year we will have the preparations of these two very important strategic documents. Environment is one of the most important, if not the most important problem in the Tuzla canton. We have migrations, we have brain drain. We don't die from that. It is a problem, but we do die from pollution. The cantonal ministry is monitoring the implementation of this plan. All the decisions are made by the government, as the Assembly, of course, performs oversight over this, and we are one of the leaders in this field, and we have to be, given our situation. We are the leaders in energy efficiency, and therefore these two documents are really of key importance to us. What is the situation in Sarajevo and Zenica? Good morning, everyone. Adnan Medic, I'm Assistant Minister for Environment Protection. I'd just like to correct you. We are now Ministry of Utility, Spatial Planning, Civil Engineering and Environment Protection of Sarajevo Canton. We've changed the title of the ministry in the meantime, so it's important that we know which institution we're representing. With respect to CAP, the cantonal plan, in addition to that plan, we also have the Green Action Plan that has been developed together with the EBRD and funded by the government of Japan. We do have implementation of certain measures, and the implementation depends on financial resources available. We all have staff within the ministry in charge of monitoring the implementation, and I can also add that we are fully committed to energy efficiency and protection of air, and therefore there is a range of activities implemented by the ministry that includes programs to change the heating in certain facilities and buildings. We also have active projects such as the landfill Smiljevici project. It is also encompassed by the Green Ecological Plan. And yes, there is always space for improvements, but given the current circumstances, I can say that we are satisfied with the level of implementation. Mr. Basic? My name is Armin Basic. I come from Zenica-Doboj Canton. I'm expert associate for environment protection, the Ministry of Spatial Planning, Transport and Communications and Environment Protection. In Zenica-Doboj Canton, we do have the cantonal plan for environment protection, and the Assembly adopted it in 2017, and it refers to the period 2017-2025. After CAP was adopted, a working group has been established to monitor its implementation, and the line minister was presiding over that working group. Of course, it was a working group that has members volunteering to it. And of course, we do have implementation of the activities that have been envisaged by the Cantonal Environment Protection Plan. And our working group, given their respective tasks, was dispersed somewhat because of their works and tasks, and therefore the minister initiated the formation of a new working group. Will there be any changes of the strategic documents? Do you have that planned? You have already mentioned, for instance, in Tuzla Canton, we've heard that there are plans to prepare a new plan. At the federation level of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mrs. Njumic, what is going on in the federation ministry when it comes to strategies and plans? So, when we talk about the federation level, I raise my hand to add something. I'd like to underline that in March this year, new law on environment protection entered into force. And in Article 1, it specifies what is the scope of the law. And there is also the aspect of monitoring of the situation in environment. Chapter 7 is completely entire to monitoring the situation in the environment sector. And also the law defines the process of adopting the federation strategy as well as cantonal plans for environment protection. So currently we have in the process of adoption under the project 30 plus a new strategy for environment protection as well as entity, new BIH strategy and entity strategies. I'm a member of the working group and we are now near the end of developing these strategic documents. I'd also like to underline that in the adoption of all the strategies, including also the cantonal plans, the public needs to be involved. Therefore, despite the fact that we've had many stakeholders involved in the adoption of the Federation strategy, we are now facing an additional phase of disseminating the information and informing all other stakeholders about the strategic document and opening the space for their comments. Therefore, this will be an important aspect of the Federation strategy. In the chapter of the law, there is a clearly specified process of adopting the strategy, and it entails also the harmonization with all the higher level strategies, so state level strategy, international agreements, etc. And it stipulates that the cantonal plans must be in line with the Federation strategic plan. The idea, of course, is to harmonize all the documents. If the canton is unable to adopt its own plan, then the canton can directly apply the Federation strategy on environment protection, but a decision formally needs to be made in that for that. And of course, all the plans and strategies involve the public consultation so that everyone can contribute to the quality of the documents. The cantonal action plans are monitored by the canton. The Federation strategy and its implementation is monitored by the Federation Ministry of Environment and Tourism and reports to the government of the Federation thereon. This is all defined in Chapter 7 of the new law. Thank you. It seems that we have a clear structure now established. There is not much debate that we must talk about environment protection, but a bit more sensitive topics are raised when we talk about financing and the resources. So when we talk about the financing of environment protection in cantons, and I will ask Mr. Hadjic, the economic expert, about this. Do we apply the principle polluter pays? So, do polluters need to pay? Thank you for the question. We've heard that there are certain strategic documents in Bosnia and Herzegovina and everything that needs to be adopted can be adopted, but there is always the key question of how to fund the implementation of these documents and whether the money that we are collecting right now is directed for that purpose. I will give you a few examples from an economic perspective. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we do have certain legislative solutions. For instance, we say we need to impose tax because of pollution. Then we have negative consequences. But the question is whether the money actually will be used for that purpose. What is the idea of having excise, of having additional tax? So let's take excise as an example. Excise tax is different from regular tax because of the intention. When you're introducing excise, there must be a specific purpose to it. And it's twofold. First, to reduce the consumption of a given product. Well, to give you an example, tobacco. So you introduce excise to also motivate people to reduce the consumption, and the money collected through excise tax is directed directly into this field, for instance, to treat the people who are ill from tobacco. Recently, we've heard that there is a new law on excise tax being introduced, and it was clear that crude fuels and electricity, the power, will be also subjected to excise tax. And the question was, what will be the period, what amount, and what will be the effects on the population? So if we, for instance, introduce excise tax, the intention is that we use less coal, but the question is, what do we do with the money that we collect? That's the important question. That's the more important question. How do we use the money? Whether that money will be used to finance the projects of environment protection, or, as is the case now with all types of excise tax, the money just go into the budget spending. So if it goes into the budget, general budget, then there is no use of introducing excise tax. This should be the difference between excise tax and the general tax. We need to know for which purpose the money will be used. And I will end my answer to this question. Whether pollute who pays? We all pay excise tax if we drive a car. And that excise tax should have its purpose. So it should be collected for a specific purpose, because we do pollute with our cars. However, it's not the case. It is just paid into the budget and it is used for current spending, and we do not have any benefit from that. So 500 million that we collect from excise tax, 500 million annually, imagine if we've invested that into environment protection. Imagine what type of infrastructure projects we could fund from this money: improve energy efficiency, increase investment capacity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, because we would be meeting the set goals in this field. We do have certain things that we need to do in the decarbonization process in this coming period, and it is a very significant potential that we have available.
Thank you very much. I never really thought of myself as a polluter, but this example with cars is very clear, because it's not only the matter of collecting funds and having the polluters pay, but it's also about how this money is used and whether it is used for the right purpose. Are there cantonal funds for environmental protection, So shall we start with Sarajevo first? As far as Sarajevo canton is concerned, we don't have cantonal environmental funds. The funds are used in such a way that part that we receive from the federation is used through the sector for environmental protection, and in one part it is used for funding of NGO sector. The second part is used for protection of nature or environment. But again, having in mind the needs of the Sarajevo canton, I think it would be very wise to think about having maybe cantonal fund for environment. Tuzla, what about Minister in Tuzla? If you allow me, I would like to reflect on the previous question about the excise duty, because this is the issue that we have discussed as a part of the previous government as well. First of all, you need to know that we are the largest industrial canton in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we probably have the largest number of registered vehicles, or maybe we're second in the country after Sarajevo. But we're talking about the fact that maybe hundreds of millions of km of excise duty collected from Tuzla canton. But we live in the road ghetto because we don't have 1 kilometer of the highway. So I disagree with the colleague. The funding the funds that should go for the particular purpose, that should also be, given to, priority cantons. And I deem that my canton is one of the priority cantons. And as for the spending of the funds from the fund, we don't have an environmental fund. There is one at the federation level, but we do have a division within the Ministry of Environment, and after we receive 70% of that we collect from some big polluters, this comes back to our canton, and we use it for the particular purpose intended for the environmental protection. Of course, we try to increase the funds, and we do so actually in cooperation with some international organizations such as UNDP, GIZ, etc. And there are also some other projects. Currently, there are 3 pending projects worth several million, which are aimed at improving the energy efficiency. But what's particularly important with all of this is to say that I'm not sure whether we need a fund, but I think that what we do have, the remaining 30%, which remains at the federation level, I think that they should be really allocated based on the priority. And as I said, we as the ministry, we have sent letter to the federation level, and we were asking actually, we are waiting for the response from the government of the federations, because we have 2 very important things that are very much the priority, and of course, in general, I think that the remaining funds from these different fees that are collected from the polluters need to be used for the right or specific purpose and according to the priority, So I'm not saying that my canton is always the priority, but nevertheless, it should be very clearly specified what and how the funding from the excise duties should be used. So thank you very much. Thank you. We go to Zenica. We in Zenica-Doboj Canton, we don't have actually the environmental fund. We only have a budgetary line to which the funds from the federation level are transferred. And then we, from the canton, we then further allocate these funds to the municipalities and cities. So we actually transfer 70% of the funds received from the federation level, and the remaining 30% we use actually according to our program. Most of the funding is used for the financing of the projects that contribute to the improvement in the waste management or the protection of environment, most of which are implemented by the NGOs. We have a positive example, for example, Kakan municipality. So with this funding, they are reconstructing the heating system in their municipality. In 3 to 4 years' time, we hope actually that their entire district heating system will be fully reconstructed. Well, we have a very difficult question for you. Do cantons use the funding for environment for the specific purpose? And have you had any opportunity to see whether this money is really used for the right purpose? And is this actually transparently reported? Before I answer your question, I would like to give a general overview about the environment. Unfortunately, environmental issues are a global problem. And we, the lawyers, when we analyze particular, political or legal system, then we see that the constitutional setup in such a fragmented and dysfunctional country, with having so many cantons, municipalities, local communities, this is something that really causes huge damage to all of us, the citizens, because, of course, the environment is also very much fragmented. We have shared competencies between entities and cantons. In Republika Srpska, this is centralized at the entity level. So this constitutional setup and the political system of Bosnia and Herzegovina indirectly and, of course, directly towards the citizen causes damage, because ultimately we are the ones suffer because of the poor planning and disharmonized regulation within the federation, let alone not harmonized legislation with the EU legislation, because this is, after all, one of the requirements. We would have to harmonize our legislation with the different regulations and directives. But this fragmentation or these shared competencies in the Federation, but also in Republika Srpska, have caused the fact that we have, 10 ministries for environment. And as I said, environment is a global problem. For example, at the level of the Paris Agreement or the Green Deal or Aarhus Convention. So we have like a number of UN documents and European international documents that are dealing with environment, are kind of getting to really consolidate their forces, whereas we are always kind of looking this, from very fragmented point of view, So we from the local level, of course, feel this the most. And of course, we always try to, and we have positive response from the local level, but the issue is whether the policy is really kind of, done top-down, with top-down approach. For example, I would say that national environmental and climate plan, which Bosnia and Herzegovina has been trying to develop at the level of Bosnia and Herzegovina for years, because this is coordinated by the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Relations. So one such strategic document, such as National Environmental and Climate Plan, got stuck, unfortunately, because we have some political obstruction in place. And I sincerely hope that these obstructions will be removed. But we as citizens cannot observe environmental issues at the level of our local community or the entity. We need to also look at it from the national level, because in any normal country, issues of this are really dealt from the top down. For example, if you have a natural disaster that is affecting Una canton or Prijedor or Bosanski Novi, because I myself come from Bihać and we from the Una River, we are very much environmentally aware, and we are very much caring for the nature there, because we do have a clear vision that we want to preserve this nature. But we have some impacts that are coming from the external borders, and this is something that is, of course, harmful to us. And of course, we have an agreement that this is something that needs to be dealt with, from the national level. So, and again, some political elites may be more involved, some less involved. But again, all of this is kind of observed from the political point of view. Or when we have the pollution from Bosnia and Herzegovina that is kind of, affecting neighboring countries, such as Modrica, having emissions that affect Croatia, then of course, then this becomes like a big issue. And then we try to actually gasify this part of Bosanski Brod without consulting the national level. So these are all the issues that are really exceeding the power of the local communities, I would say. And of course, I'd like to just say, because Ms. Numic mentioned the law on environmental protection of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, I'd like to congratulate the Federation Ministry of Environment and Tourism for the initiative they made and for their efforts, because they were really pushing hard to pass this law. I've been involved in the process back in 2013 and back in 2014. There was a USAID project, and I'm really glad to see that there is some continuity to this matter, because even this involvement by USAID confirms how, big friends they are to us in many respects, including environment. So the law on environmental protection of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina is a very good piece of legislation, which is largely aligned with the EU acquis. But this is only one of the regulations. We did analysis of many regulations that we have from 2012 onwards, at the level of the state, at the level of the Federation and Republika Srpska in the area of environment. And I would tell you that having done this analysis, and we've analyzed not only laws, but also the bylaws and different rule books, and there is a whole ocean. I would say that we have 300 different laws and bylaws, regulations, decrees, different types of legal documents governing the issues of environment. So we can't just say that we have only law on the environmental protection, because there is a number of the regulations. We have a law on the water protection or Water Act. Well, thank you very much for giving, but I'm just trying to say that this issue is so broad in terms of law. Therefore, we really need to approach it. But before you give us an example, just one question, now that you really, took us to the world of law. So the Green Deal for the Western Balkans, or the Green Agenda, how do we fit in? Because now we're talking about a very complex legal system, different levels governing this area. So what have we done with respect to joining the Green Agenda? So what are the possibilities and what are the limitations? As for the Green Agenda, this is a very important topic, and this is something that we need to agree on. One segment of the Green Deal is biodiversity, So when we talk about the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, this is where we did some significant progress. And I think that in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we could be proud when it comes to biodiversity. Another segment of the Green Deal is soil protection, protection of air and water. In these segments, for each of these elements, we have regulations in place. So we have air law, also Water Act, etc. So that's why I was talking about many pieces of legislation which are fairly good. They're well written, and it's not about really not having the laws in place. The problem is about not enforcing these laws. The point is that the institutions responsible for different areas. For example, we have a very good Water Act, but the question is, are we really protecting our waters appropriately? We all know that now we have the prohibition on building mini hydropower plants. I'd like to commend Federation Ministry of Environment and Tourism and Minister Japo, who courageously stood up against all these lobbies. Because unfortunately, these lobbyists are really looking only to the perspective of the individuals, not about the general public, Well, now, since you're pointing already to some of the problems that we may have, so if we look at the legislation or if we are observing this issue only from the local level. But I have a question for representatives from the cantons and also for a lady from the Federation Ministry. So do cantons have the capacities or to absorb the funds from the Green Deal or from the Green Agenda? Well, I think that colleague was right in bringing up some things, but I think that, we failed to identify some threats. Of course, we need to have cantonal Ministry of Environmental Issues because, we need to look after some local issues. But we also need to have the agency at the state level. Of course, this is not going to be the body that will deprive any of the powers of the cantonal bodies, But such a body should have some coordinating role that should maybe define some issues such as those accidents in Trgovinska Gora. So this body should have coordination over the projects that are relevant for the entire Bosnia and Herzegovina. What you need to know is that division of the competencies, is really poor when it comes to environment, because sometimes some cantonal ministries have some responsibilities towards the European environmental agency, But the point is that actually European agency is looking at us only from the state level, so they can't communicate with the cantonal level, But the point is that maybe some ministries may not have these direct responsibilities, but nevertheless, whether they have these powers or not, they need to be involved. And specifically, when we talk about the Green Deal and the implementation, the major hazard or the threat is decarbonization. Colleague mentioned, that biodiversity, but of course I understand that this is actually very important for Unasana canton, but for us, decarbonization is actually the biggest problem, because we also have a huge number of people working in a thermal power plant, and then if you multiply this by the number of their families, so we really have vast, population of people who are really depending on these thermal power plants, but we need to at the same time reduce the level of carbonization. We have a problem over the construction of the Block 7, even though I'm a professor of the environmental security, and even though I'm advocating for renewable energy sources, I think that this needs to be done in phases, so this exit needs to be phased out, because you need to look how all this affects your economy. And what I disagree with is that we should simply set this aside, or those people who say we shall not have it, without involving, experts in the field into this, because according to the National Emission Reduction Plan, we have 3 scenarios, and each of these scenarios actually includes Block 7. We have the targets for reducing these emissions, for the carbon dioxide or nitrogen, etc. But Block 7 does not need to be built, but we need to reduce our pollution. And how are we going to do that unless we build the alternative ones? So I don't want to go into the details as to what is cheaper to us, and maybe not to introduce the gas, which is twice the price of the coal, and how we're going to compensate the GDP in our canton, which largely depends, because we don't have the power of the wind, or we don't have rivers in our canton, not as much as the other cantons. So for us, this is a major threat. And that's why the cantonal government and cantonal Ministry of Environment need to be involved in this. So cantonal ministries, they need to be absolutely involved in everything that takes place and that affects not only our canton, but everything else that happens in the country, because indirectly we will be affected with what happens in the other parts of the country. I very much appreciate the gentleman, and he mentioned actually the issue of decarbonization and energy security. Of course, I agree fully with him, but maybe just to point here, we in Bosnia and Herzegovina need to have a clear vision. Yes, we are in favor of green agenda and green or clean environment, but we need to have a clear vision. What is it that we want to have? We can't have decarbonization and energy transition overnight. Very often, the hypocritical Europe often tells us you have to give up some energy project, and later on you will, import some very expensive electricity. In order to have stability of our power system, we need to have a block, and that should be a new block with environmental standards, which will replace the old blocks, So this energy transition and the decarbonization process needs to be phased. You can't simply give up all of this overnight and find yourself in a situation that you have your energy sovereignty jeopardized, or to become dependent in terms of energy from other countries. So we need to really do things step by step, and we need to have a clear vision. If we did Podvelezje 1, we need to work on Podvelezje 2 at the same time. And also we need to take into account actually this thermal block 7, which will also help us actually to close down the other ones, So of course, maybe they will tell us actually that we will push this decarbonization by 2027, and by that time maybe we will close all our old blocks, and then we will find ourselves in a situation where we would have to import electricity. So we need to know, if we decided that we give up of mini hydropower power plants, which is very good because this is environmentally wise, then we need to say, okay, yes, potentially we're going slowly towards energy transition. I've just recently spoke to Professor Martin Thijs, who's expert for the air protection. So he thinks too that we need to do this process step by step. In negotiation with the EU, we need to talk about this. Unfortunately, our political elites do not have the sense of, all of this, when we talk about the CO2 emissions or paying these penalties, In 91 to 96, we had the, very reduced industrial activity because during the war, and obviously we didn't have any emissions. We haven't had any contribution to the pollution at that time. So this is very important. So when our ministry negotiate, even though they start, 2012 and 2014 as this national NAP, this is something that is taken as a reference point. But I think that Bosnia and Herzegovina should try to negotiate to have the deadline prolonged, because Block 7 is not only issue for Tuzla Canton. This is actually the issue that is relevant for the entire Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But do we have any plan that is in line with the agenda, be it this one by 2070 or the next one for the next 5-year period? And if we do have, can you tell us actually a bit more about it? So far we have heard actually several important challenges coming at the same time. So on one hand, we need to have energy stability or security. We have decarbonization. Then we have a problem with economy. Why with economy? Simply because in 2023, we will be paying cross-border tax for products, not only for the export of electricity, but for all the products that will be used, the electricity that is generated with solid fuel. So this is a problem for our economy because not everyone will be able to use the clean energy in their production. Then we also have the problem with the mining sector, and Dr. really nicely explained this. We can't overnight abandon, and you, Mr. Mujagic, explained this very nicely. We can't just leave people jobless overnight, so we need to find solution for that. When we speak about a mining sector, for example, unfortunately, the mining sector is currently in a horrible situation. In the last 5 years, the mining sector has accumulated debt by 360 million BAM, which someone will have to repay. And I assume it will be the citizens, really, because after all, these are the public companies. Then we have another situation. We have to work at the same time on decarbonization. We need to work on larger investments and to have this energy security. What's important to do is, first of all, we need to look at the structure. We need to see how much each of the sector contributes to our economy. Obviously, generation of electricity is very important and it has huge contribution, whereas the sector of construction also has much lower contribution. So this could be a potential. We can do gradual transition from the mining sector towards the construction industry, because there we have some important, opportunities such as energy efficiency. So about 12 billion km just to do, the thermal insulation of all our facilities. This is an important investment which could be the driver of the economy. But in the end, this will lead to the fact that not many people will leave, will become jobless, because it's important that we do this gradually. We need to increase generation of power from the renewables in order to be able to generate more electricity without jeopardizing our export sector. It's not only about the export of power, which is maybe third or fourth export product, but if we have reduced export, then our industrial production will fall down, we will reduce the number of jobs, and in general, we will have the reduced level of economic activity. And I don't need to tell you that actually we are really, not standing high on the lists of the countries with the energy activity, But the point is actually that the point is that we have very low level of added value that is generated through our inactivity. So we can't really expect that we could increase our growth by 2023, even if we follow this ambitious plan, but I think that we can't really expect any significant economic prosperity unless we really do this simultaneously and by doing it gradually. Okay, I'm saying only that we need to really deal with the specific data. We have some plan for closing down the thermal blocks. By 2022, we should close down all the blocks except for the block 6 and to build block 7. Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to have 7,500 gigawatt hours of energy. In order for us to be able to do that, we will be missing 1,000 gigawatt hours, which we would need to generate from renewables. And to complete this by 2028, only to have the stability of supply to the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That means that we would need to build 7 more wind powers, such as Podvelezhje. That's exactly what we're talking about, because when we speak about the transition here, the French, a few days ago, decided that they will build 4 another nuclear reactors because of unstable supply. Germany built a new thermal block in 2020. Poland built actually 5 thermal blocks, in the period from 2015 to 2020. I attended a conference where we have heard actually from Poland. And comparing to Poland, we are actually far bigger, generators of coal, So obviously they committed that they will do decarbonization, but their deadline is pushed forward relative to us. So I think that we must not radically accept everything that Europe asks us of, I think that this is not the right thing to do, So we need to be wise, we need to have a cohesion across the governments and to have a single voice about these matters. And what's very important about this, that in the energy sector, the long-term plan of energy must not be reduced to the 4-year term of politicians. Politicians need to let the experts deal with the matter. Okay, I'd like to ask you, what is your subjective impression when it comes to political agreement that you've just mentioned? Is there a political consensus? No. You know what's the problem? Why Block 7 hasn't been built? Because we had a political party which has made the plans, then the new government came in and they said no, and they said we will do it in another location. We have lost... I did a feasibility study, and I know that the block was supposed to be built by 2018. So we have lost 8 years. And for these 8 years, these remaining 3 blocks are continuing to polluting simply because they haven't let the experts dealing with that. So it was the politicians really, developing the policy. So this is the biggest obstacle, When it comes to mining, we can't really look this, very simply, I mean, Kreka is the largest mine in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have invested the smallest investment there because, Tuzla mine actually generates much less coal, but the investments have been actually, much bigger than in Kreka, So now, of course, we need to look after these people, because, of course, now the best thing would be actually if we could retire all these people, but then in Tuzla Canton, we will have actually, less than 1 person covering 1 retired person, So this is not good balance. But the point is that we need to really have political agreement in this. We do have experts in the field, but we first need to listen to ourselves. We need to have an agreement and then to offer this to Europe. But we need to have 1 single voice and strong voice towards Europe, and then we will be okay.
Your question about the political consensus is a very good question. The NDI project is very important in this regard, and I had an opportunity to see this study. I'm so happy that we have this working group, that we have politicians, MPs, cantonal delegates, people from the ministries, people from different political parties. So this should not be viewed as a particular problem of a political elite or political party. Environment, economy, development, these are the problems of all the citizens and all the political parties and all the representatives of political parties, irrespective of who they're affiliated with. Everyone must have a single voice. Block 7 and consensus will be something that will be talked about in November in the Federation Parliament, when the MPs in the House of Representatives and the House of Peoples will be voting on this project. So I call upon all the representatives of political parties here to keep this vision in mind. There is no alternative. And I'm sure that we are all here focusing on environment, and we are aware that the requirements must be met, that the EU is, in fact, setting through the directives, filters, and all other aspects, having maximum protection possible. And as Mr. Karaja said, we really need to bring this project to an end. We shouldn't be losers again and gamble another chance that we're offered. And we've already gambled with a much more favorable bloc with a European country. Now we have to work with China because nobody else wants to work with us. And the circular economy, that's another very important aspect. This is an area that I'm sure Faruk can cover as an economic expert. Circular economy is something that's recognized by the Green Agenda. So I think that we should use everything that we have in production, in consumption, in pollution, everything available to work towards pollution reduction. And this is why environmental issues are interdisciplinary. So we need engineers involved, engineers of environment, engineers of energy, lawyers, economists, all professions, biologists as well. So these are very interdisciplinary fields. And in those working groups, we should have all well-meaning citizens who really want to work on the improvement of this. Allow me just to finish. Can we please come back to the rule book later, because you've mentioned citizens, and I need to ask this question. Given that it's obvious that environment protection is a very complex issue, and we've said several times that it's a matter of economy more than ecology, politics as well. So this is something that affects us all, and it seems to me that not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but everywhere in the world, we have this very direct, personal interest-directed civic activism. So in environment protection, really, I'm sure that we've all seen Erin Brokovich. So this is something that impacts us directly. So to what extent are NGOs involved in environment protection? To what extent do we cooperate with them? We always ask this question: if there is real cooperation, if there is a real common action plan, or we have a fragmented situation, project-oriented. So how do we work with them? Whoever wants to answer. Well, maybe here the Federation Ministry of Environment and Tourism should answer. I'll gladly answer your question. Our cooperation was good always, but in those recent times, I think that it's really at a very high level. There is a lot of mutual respect. We exchange opinions, we make decisions together. They're involved in the adoption of our laws and secondary legislation. We take into account their comments, we organize meetings. And I believe that we have NGO representatives here with us today. So we really want to hear their opinion. If things are not good, tell us, we'll fix it. But if they're good, please tell everyone. So We were talking about the problems, about the Sofia Declaration and the Green Agenda. I mean, if you give me the opportunity, I'll share some aspects with you. So you've asked, to what extent are the cantons ready for the European Green Plan, and how much responsibility they have in this. So this European strategic document is in fact the developmental document of the European Union, and the Green Agenda or the Sofia Declaration is based on it. These are all quite recent documents from 2019 and 2020, and we have the most recent one, October 6th, 2021, the Brdo Declaration, which is also very much relevant. So we have committed as the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, together with Montenegro, Serbia, North Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, to enter this process, to launch it, and to become part of the Green Agenda, to implement it. Today we talked about the problems that should be taken into account when we're developing action plans and strategies. However, our commitment should be in the direction of decarbonization. We only have the cantons today. I don't know if we have any representatives from municipalities. The Green Agenda and the plans, as much as I've read them, is something that is very much relevant for the local communities. They're very important, especially the mining municipalities, small mining municipalities that will be most affected because they largely rely on fossil fuels and exploitation of the mine. Therefore, it is very important to take into account the social and the economic aspect in the projects. First, we must assess the mining municipalities in developing good projects that will be supported with huge funds under the Green Agenda. Four, there will be 30 billion euros allocated for Western Balkans, 9 billion grant funds, and 20 billion investment. So, whether the state will decide for decarbonization or not, this is a very good opportunity to have good projects, to use the funds that are available and improve our environment. But we need political will, we need investment, and we need to know how to best invest. These projects must have clearly defined goals, clear dynamics of implementation, monitoring, and auditing and evaluation. Thank you for this reflection. This is definitely related with, this definitely relates to the civil society as well. I'm sure that they're envisaged, in the implementation of the Green Agenda at the local level. I interrupted you. I'm sorry. When you were mentioning the process of adopting the rule book, you, as a representative of the Institute, participated in the adoption of this rule book. Maybe you can share with us the experience of the process and your contribution so that we get an idea whether the NGOs actually take part in the substantive aspect or just the service tasks. So now, in context of creating partnership for a better situation in environment protection. So after your answer, we will hear the question from the audience. Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to announce a document, the Law Institute in Bosnia and Herzegovina, with the support of a large project. Let's think about nature, which is implemented by the Center for Promotion of Civil Society. We are now finalizing a very important policy paper that I have authored together with Tarik Kupusovic, professor, Martin Thais, Mehmet Cero, also professor, and Biljana Radanovic. She is here with us today, so maybe we can later develop a discussion. And Dubravka Bošnjak. All of us are the authors of a policy paper entitled Green Agenda, or Implementation of Green Agenda in Bosnia and Herzegovina. we as an interdisciplinary group provided our vision of the implementation of the green agenda in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I just wanted to announce this document. Soon it will be available and accessible to all of you. I hope that we will get a mailing list from NDI so that we can send you the electronic version as well. So it might also be a good idea to hear your suggestions or possible comments. And with respect to a legislative drafting, this is why I commended the Federation Ministry. Through the USAID project, we had this activity as an expert organization of the civil society to take part in finalizing and developing the draft law on the environment protection of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, under the support of the USAID, we made a study on environmental licenses. And now that you've mentioned the rule book, for instance, if it's a rule book on waste management, you always must have experts who are engineers, who are experts for waste or water protection. And on the other hand, you must have lawyers that will transform that into a legal norm. And the entire process is very cohesive, so it must be teamwork. You cannot only have lawyers writing the regulations, because you must have experts who are knowledgeable in the field. So you, as a civil society organization, you've taken part in the regulations drafting, contributing with your expertise. So you also participated in public policy segment. Question. My name is Davor Šupuković. I come from Maglaj, Association of Citizens Vojničavi. This is the seat of EKO Hub Maglaj, Žepče, Zavidović i Usora region. And also we participate in the CPCD project, Think About Nature. And we have another project that is funded by the Swedish government about sustainable environment protection and management in Zenica-Doboj Canton. I'd like to underline something very important. We always face the same problem, including today. You have issued a guidebook on environment protection, and there is not a single word on the protection of nature. So this entire time in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think we're just missing the point. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have a huge problem that nobody speaks about, and that's protection of nature. The funds that are allocated through projects to different NGOs and municipalities are usually used for utility departments and utility tasks. So, cleaning the waste and managing waste. That's not protection of nature. And on the other hand, the main problem that I will now share with you, I'm sure many of you are aware of it, is that Bosnia and Herzegovina has only 3% of protected natural spaces. Zenica-Doboj Canton, only 1.5%. That is the monument, natural monument Tajan. According to EU recommendations, this should be 10% or 17 or 18 now. They've changed this. The countries in our neighborhood, Croatia, Slovenia, Bulgaria, Germany, over 40% of protected territories. We keep boasting that we have beautiful nature, we talk about the environment, we talk about the beauties, and we're not doing anything. And the proof that we are not doing anything is the fact that in the Federation law on environment protection, there is the stipulation that there should be an institute on nature protection. It was never established. In Republika Srpska, they do have such an institute, and they're intensively working on protecting the nature. And I believe that in the last 2 or 3 years, they've introduced 8 new protected areas. In the Federation, I can't even remember when was the last time that such a protection was introduced. Sarajevo Canton is also a bright example that we want to follow in Zenica-Doboj Canton, because there is a public institution that manages protection of nature. There are 5 nature parks in Sarajevo Canton. So through this project, Think of Nature, Simon Lemesh is here from EKO Forum Zenica. They work in Zenica on protection of nature. We work in Maglaja and Žepče. We are also working towards establishing such a cantonal institution. I'm sorry the minister is not here, because in fact we came here to speak to the minister, but the assistant minister is here, so that's also right. We would like to meet with the ministry soon. You know, of all the funds that is used for utility, maybe some funds can be allocated to have such an institute or an institution that will work on protection of nature. This is, in my view, the most important thing. This is the green agenda, because nature is the foundation of any green agenda. When we protect our nature, we will be protecting our rivers, we will be protecting our forests, our biodiversity, everything that we keep boasting about and we're not doing anything about. Thank you for the comment. Thank you for the question. I'd like, now that you've received some kind words, can you tell us in Sarajevo Canton how it has been regulated? And I'd like to ask you and Mr. Basic from Zenica to give us your estimate about, or your idea about, the type of the projects that are implemented. Is it more service-oriented or public policy-oriented? So can you give us an overview? What is the balance between projects of the different kinds that are being supported in the cantons? Well, I'd like to just briefly comment on this. Are the cantons ready for the agenda? Yes, we are committed in principle to the agenda, but what we need to work on in the coming period, in order to be able to access the enormous funds of money, we need staffing, we need human resources. So without having good project proposals, we cannot do much, and all of this will be open to public calls for projects. So we need people who have the intellectual capacities to prepare the projects, to apply for the projects, to implement them, and finally to report on the implementation of the project. So in this coming period, in addition to all the challenges that we have, we need intellectual and human capacities and resources, not only within the ministries, but also in the NGO sector. The NGO sector can serve as a very serious partner to institutions in this regard, but when it comes to the capacities of the institutions, I clearly see that this is something that we need to work on in the future. Given the regulations in the Sarajevo Canton, we do have a lot of overlaps of competencies, we do have over-regulations, and we do have too many problems. To improve the work on the ground and to protect the environment and also the utility activity, we are now working on drafting the law on utility or environmental police. So they will in fact work on the ground to monitor possible unlawful waste disposal, unlawful landfills, and in the first phase to implement preventive measures, but also this law should provide for repressive mechanisms and measures for the perpetrators. In Sarajevo Canton, well, thank you for mentioning the protection of nature. I am aware that you have problems in Sarajevo Canton. As of 2009, we have started work on the protected areas. We have 5 protected areas right now, and there is the cantonal public institution. We started with, they started with just 1 person employed. Now they have 19 people employed, which is not sufficient for the territory. So the idea was to recruit additional 11 people this year to work directly on protection of nature on the ground. The protected areas are a very high quality mechanism, and really, I commend the Republika Srpska and what they're doing. But when I was in Canada at the International Fair on Nature Protection, they told us, don't have protected areas on paper, meaning that, you adopt a law on environment protection, nature protection, but you don't have the capacities, either financial or human capacities, to really protect that. So protecting the nature is a very expensive hobby, as I say. We have Bembasha, the protected landscape, established as such 2017. We still do not have a ranger there, and we should have at least 2 people to have active protection of the area, because the largest incidents happen on weekends. So without having 2 or 3 people, it will be very difficult, and we need to really move in that direction of staffing this activity. In general, we say ecology, but when we say ecology, we mean also the protection of nature. I think it goes hand in hand. So the law on environment protection or nature protection is something that refers to the environment, and this is something that I always, take together. You've mentioned the institutional competence, and yes, this cannot be compensated by the NGOs, except for project preparation, and you've said that there is need for partnership and cooperation. When we talk about these service type of jobs and tasks, we've talked about the reports, for instance, of NGOs. A lot of their actions involve the cleaning of unlawful landfills, etc. So do you have a rough estimate of how many such service projects exist and how much, in fact, are fully equal partnerships? Well, in Sarajevo Canton, the funds of the environment protection, the Fund for the Environment Protection also applies for such projects. We fully support any NGO that applies with a project to remove unlawful landfills. So it depends. I mean, there are very specific measures that they implement on the ground, but also it's not only that. So 50% is the actual physical action on the ground, and then 50% are trainings or other types of activities. It depends on the call, and it depends on the project proposals that the NGOs submit. Many of the NGOs are really narrowly specialized for certain areas. Well, the line ministry is trying really to answer any requests for information, always tries to respond and react to NGOs. And one of the examples of cooperation of the ministry and the NGOs is seen in the implementation of the projects that the public sector grants based on a public call. 60 to 7% are the waste management project, 30% protection of nature. But there is a bit bigger problem. When we publish a call and when we receive project proposals or applications, the Commission opens these proposals, and we've detected that there are many great projects, but the application lacks the required document, so either an ID number or an authorized person or something like this. So we have to exempt these applications, and they're really good. There are some great ideas. So what we need to do is really work on informing the associations to let them know what they must submit in order to be taken into account. So these are some of the technical difficulties. Yes, Mr. Mujagic, then Mr. Karad. Well, at the federation level of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have the UNA National Park. This is a public enterprise at the level of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, is under the supervision of the Federation Ministry of Environment and Tourism. I'd like to give this as a good example because this is something that started as an enthusiastic action of one man, and now we have many rangers. If you haven't visited the National Park UNA, please do that, because it's really worth it. And I'd like to see more such national parks in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this is something that we should really strive for. This is something that assists us in tourism, in economy, and really all of these things are quite interconnected. And we can use the benefits of what we have, but we need to have good marketing and good economic propaganda in order to actually be able to get those benefits. I'm sure my colleague Farag will know more. I have to go to Škrpački book. There was a lot of concrete, but I think you're still acceptable. Well, thank you to Sarajevo Canton. I really have to commend this. Yes, and there is a problem of who will protect. We have one such area, 8,000 hectares, 3 municipalities, and now we are preparing 2 regulation plans. They were just recently, an initiative was adopted to pronounce Ozren Mountain, part of Ozren Mountain, also a protected area. We do have rangers and we do have an institution that deals with this, but there should be more work. When you have a budget of 466 million km and you're a larger canton than Sarajevo having twice less than money, I mean, nature protection is something that is heavily rationalized. About your question with respect to the NGOs and the ratio of their waste cleaning and other activities, well, it can be a Sisyphus type of a job. First of all, you have to have the absolute coverage of waste disposal. We have 60% of coverage of all the household in the waste disposal. So it's always a good idea to have these landfills cleared and cleaned. But the problem is that in 2 or 3 days, they will just, pop up somewhere else. And therefore, these problems should be resolved institutionally, not through NGOs. I really admire what they're doing. In our canton, they've done a great job. They've exerted a lot of pressure for Sički Brod lake, and they've stopped this practice of it becoming a landfill of the thermal power plant. So they've exerted the pressure, and then the government of Tuzla Canton, through my ministry, adopted amendments to the regulations, and therefore that lake is no longer a landfill of the thermal electric power plant of Tuzla. NGOs have a very important role. Sometimes they're politicized, sometimes they're not clear in their activities, sometimes, they have the role of just attacking the authorities, but it's good to have the opposition, and it's good also to have the NGOs that will really raise your awareness in many aspects and make you do your job. Thank you very much. We'll see what will be the feedback. We have 3 questions in the audience, and with those 3 questions, we are coming to the end of the panel. Please take the floor.
My name is Biljana Radanovic. I'm an advisor at the law faculty. Thank you very much for this beautiful gathering here, and thank you for having in mind a very important thing which always has to be actually, in place, and that is the economy. Thank you very much, Mr. Hodžić, for being present here. And it's a pity that you don't have more time to present things or to tell about us economists and economy in general, because we are an important factor in this. When it comes to, Bosnia and Herzegovina and EU, all of us, we keep using this syntagm of civil society organization, because somehow an NGO sector, has somewhat negative connotation. Civil society organization, which includes academia and many other associations of citizens, etc., so far have been, some, bright example, because they have communication with government institutions. And most of us have been depending on the projects of international organizations. Civil society organizations and their representatives do not want to have it all boil down to communication. They would like to be true partners to cantonal entity and state institutions. So I'd like to invite representatives, namely ministers and all others, to accept that, because by nature, this should be a normal thing, because there are many good information that we could share with you, namely from the informal sector, when it comes to manual produced by OECD. And again, circular economy has been pretty much neglected as an issue. When we speak about circular economy, we are somewhere in the middle. We're still using linear economy, which is, nearly abandoned in the EU. So now with the Green Deal, many of the European countries are kind of exiting linear economy. I've seen through this research that we've done and through writing this policy paper that small and medium enterprises have been underutilized, and they are pretty much invisible. There is no any support for them, even though they are part of the circular economy or the economy in general. So obviously they're not visible, they're not involved, even though they're very, very important, in particular, if we think about the circular economy and how to use some things, and this is in particular relevant in the context of the landfills, So again, I'd like to use this opportunity. Well, thank you very much for your reflection and your requests, and I think indeed this is a very symbolic dialogue between representatives of authorities and civil society organizations. There are two other questions. Good afternoon, all. My name is Sabina Schachman. I'm the Secretary of the Federation Ministry of Environment and Tourism. So what Suada forgot to mention, and it is related to NGO sector. Yes, I think that somehow, we need to change this perception of the communication between NGO sector and us, because we're not enemies to one another, So we have worked with the Center for Energetics in Tuzla, and we had actually a commission, and they all the time were with us in communication. We wrote this study all together, and now we've asked actually representative of NGO sector, now that we're doing some new strategic assessment, environmental impact assessment, which is very important and which stems from the new environmental law, we do have communication with them and we have their consultations, namely they are involved in the process. So the question for analyst here, so when you talk about Block 7, I'm, by vocation, an energy engineer. And when we speak about stability of the power system, you always need to look at the taxes, because if you can tell us about this new cross-border adjustment and introduction of the new charges, how much will that affect on our future decision about the Block 7? I suggest that we take one more question and then we can hear your questions, your answers. Apologize. Was there third question? Good afternoon. My name is Sanja Remic. I'm an MP in Zenica-Doboj Canton, and I would like to ask a question for the young colleague. Obviously he had some short time to talk about these issues, but he himself mentioned that the only activity of the ministry is to form the commission and to publish public call for NGOs. we spoke more specifically about the wild landfills, and I wanted to know, do you, in your ministry, have a registry of how many wild landfills we have? And also, I'd like to know, have you ever organized, because we've been discussing, the problems of NGOs not submitting the full package of documents. Have you ever organized any kind of training for NGOs to tell them what else they need to prepare in order to submit the full package of the papers required, for the project applications? Thank you very much for your question. Miristar Karajin first, and then Mr. Beshanda, and then myself. Okay, the worst case scenario. Production from thermal plants costs 40 euro per megawatt hour. And with the payment of tax or the charge for emissions, according to the worst case scenario, it's 62 euro per megawatt hour, which brings us to 102 megawatt hour. 1 megawatt hour import is actually 200 euros, or 202 euros. So, of course, we could take into account some other indicators. We could take into account gas. Maybe one thermal plant can transfer to gas or transit to gas to try to balance it. It will be twice the cost of the coal. I'm not defending coal here by any means. I'm just saying what the figures tells us. I also wanted to say something, but it slipped my mind. Speaking of the figures, when we look at the numbers, and when the numbers tells us that what we get from Sofia Declaration, and then we would receive 1 billion euro of grant funds and 20 billion investment into project, and we will see who will be implementing that. Where the president of the country hates the country in which he lives, I believe that it will be very discouraging for the foreigners to invest, and I'm not really 20 years old to be sort of disillusional here. So, but of course, when someone tell you that, okay, there will be funds for you to really mitigate some, social, consequences. But we have Tuzla, for example. One of the former transport ministry attempted to complete the roads, and we got actually stuck in one place where we have a bottleneck. Simply, we have a quarrel or feud with the owner of the land for 15 years, and we can't move any further, So if we close down the blocks, all the blocks will be closed down by 2040. We will be a country which will be environmentally accepted, because most of the European country is far ahead of Serbia. Are we ready to really embark on this ship, because there are so many things that we need to take into account. I'm not saying that this is something that is carved in stone, of course, we need to really find way to phase this process, to do it gradually. And we need to work in synergy, not fragmented as we are. We simply need to take into account all the aspects, including economic, social, and all other, requirements that are requested of us by the EU. Mr. Pasic? When it comes to training for the NGOs, so far we haven't had any training courses, but we plan to do this in the future. As for the landfills and the total number, I can't really tell you because I'm only a staff there, and I know that in this short period of time, 30% of the funding that is used for regional wild landfill Mošćanica, and all the projects that are applying are the utility companies from Zenica-Doboj Canton, so they are really receiving most of the funds for this purpose. Mr. Mujagic asked for a floor. Very briefly, I just wanted to add upon what Mr. Karađa has said in response to the question of Ms. Selimbegovic. We are all here environmentally aware, we are all pro-green, but we need to see what is the lesser damage. In my opinion, The lesser damage is to give up of some project, because giving up of some project has not only energy and environmental consequences, because obviously we will be forced to receive energy from old blocks, which are far worse. So we will have enormous damage, legal and environmental damage. We will lose the arbitration. And again, we, as the end users, will be fined, I don't know, 400 to 500 million marks of damage if we give up. And I'm really glad that this indicator has provided, economically accurate figure, to see what is the price of the megawatt hour, what is the megawatt hour price at the market, because obviously there are both legal, environmental, and social reason why this project should start and complete as soon as possible. Well, the question was actually how much the tax will affect, the prices in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I can tell you this. Of course, this will be paid by the citizens. The companies simply cannot bear all the costs. Lately, we keep hearing that there will be increase in the price of electricity, not towards citizens, but towards industry. But talking to many businessmen, I learned that actually they will not be able to really depreciate this. They will not be able to really sustain this increased cost. Sarajevo Gas, for example, their monthly cost for bakery products is about 200,000 km. And if the price rises by 70%, at least by 20%, all the bakery products will be more expensive by 20%. And if you add on that all the taxes that they need to pay, irrespective of the market price, but the market is as it is, we will have a process of the growing inflation, which is something beyond our control. There are too many reasons, for this. But again, it will all be burden, of the citizens, even though they will not pay more expensive electricity. But in the end, they will be paying all other, costs of the products at a higher price. But if we see how much of fee we pay for renewables, even now we're paying a lot of, for renewables, which are, again, not used for the purpose of the public enterprises, but it goes as an incentive for private companies. So I guess we need to make a cost-benefit analysis in all areas. It's very difficult to try to offer some conclusion at the end of this panel, because I've really enjoyed, and it often shows that when we open a topic which really bothers us for quite a long time, we want to really solve it all through one discussion and in 10 minutes. I hope that you will forgive me for interrupting you, because sometimes I really see that, of course, it's impossible to address all these issues, so quickly. But I'd like to thank you for being open and frank discussing these issues, because it seems to me that we have indicated some points that are relevant for the, future guidance, on the discussion on this topic, But again, it's important to say that this is all actually multi-political, multi-government coordination, which is something that requires firm negotiating attitude here. And all this is really relevant for accepting the requirements or even interpreting the requirements that we assumed. It's very important that we understand our capacities and all the things that are envisaged by the Green Deal, how much we can really comply with that. And so obviously we could say that it's very important for all of us, that we all be more aware of our liabilities and all of our responsibilities in the process. Maybe the ultimate solutions won't be ideal, but it will be the best possible at the time if we have such an approach, if we have approach that requires a joint effort of all the parties, of all different levels of government, and fair distribution of revenues, and the use of such funds, So I'd like to thank for all the questions and comments from the audience. And I do hope that maybe we could also get some additional questions and answers, later on during the day. Now, according to agenda, we have about 15-minute break. Of course, we would like to thank all the viewers who are following us through, via live stream. And now we will just make a 15-minute break.